Good evening. We are grateful for your attendance here this evening and the opportunity that you have taken and the advantage that you have taken to come and to be here and to worship God in spirit and truth on this day that is dedicated as a day of worship, separate and apart from the rest of the week, a day dedicated to the worship of our God, and we are grateful always for your presence in doing so. A few housekeeping things that we failed to mention, or more importantly that I failed to mention to the one doing the announcements this evening. We will have a men's breakfast tomorrow at 8. If you have not been regularly coming, but you don't have anything to do tomorrow at 8, we would love for you to be here. It's a wonderful time for us to get together to enjoy some breakfast, some fellowship, and some work for this community and for this congregation. As well as for the VBS meeting, we will be meeting down front where we met the first time, as well as one very important one that we have not mentioned yet. The directory photos will begin to be taken next Sunday morning. So wear your Sunday best, get all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and get all dressed up, and we'll make sure to get those pictures taken. We probably won't get them all done in one Sunday, but y'all make sure to show up, and it'll be a good excuse for us to dress up for several weeks in the event that you don't get yours taken. When looking at Jesus and the old law, and I was telling Sydney, she normally asks me what my title is, so she can take some notes on it. And I told her, I said, I probably would have changed it had I spent some more time thinking about the title. I would probably better title this one, Jesus and the Old Law, looking at the relationship that Jesus has with the Old Law. And in order for us to do that, we're going to actually begin in Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 here in just a moment. However, when we look at the teachings of the Old Law and the importance of the teachings of the Old Law, Jesus plays a pivotal role within that. And as we seek this month to better understand God, it's important that we understand the Son, or the part of the Godhead known as Jesus the Christ, the Messiah, the Savior, the God in the flesh. And one of the very first things that he does is he delivers what is known as the Sermon on the Mount, the greatest sermon to be preached. And in this sermon, he begins to address some things concerning the old law. And this is very important considering who it is that is speaking. This is not just Jesus the Christ, this is God in the flesh speaking. And something that Jesus is set to do in his ministry and in his work upon this earth was not just to be the Savior of all mankind, was not only to sacrifice himself, not only to live a perfect and sinless life and give us wonderful examples. He was meant to come and be God in our presence. And what he does in the Sermon on the Mount is he takes lessons or messages or even laws that had been delivered to this people, to this group of people who seek to follow after God, and he expounds upon them a little bit. And he explains them a little bit more. A law that maybe could have been misunderstood. In fact, most of these laws had become misunderstood, or had either been misused in a way that they place so many extra things upon them that the weight of that law has lessened, or maybe in quite the opposite. They would do everything up to that point except for cross that one line. They'd teeter a little bit or get right up to the point of breaking and then back off. And so Jesus is going to explain a little bit of the importance of understanding this law and how it is important to us as Christians, or as us who seek to be followers of God under the New Testament law, how we can better follow these laws. Now, most of these laws that he's going to explain are laws found within the Ten Commandments, the laws delivered by God through Moses to the people of Israel, laws that would continue on with the Israelite people up until the point of the cross when Jesus put an end to the old law and brought forth the new law. However, each of these laws is not only possessed within the old law, but also within the new. Each of these, at least that we are going to address, are mentioned also within the new law, which means that we ourselves should seek to strive to follow after these things. However, notice what is said in verse 17 of Matthew chapter 5. In verse 17, he wants to make clear a message. He wants to make clear something unto them before he gets into this furthering of these laws. He says, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law or the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but rather to fulfill. For assuredly I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass away, one jot or one tittle will by no means pass from the law till all is fulfilled. Whoever therefore breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches men so shall be called the least within the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches them, he shall be called great within the kingdom of heaven. For I say unto you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and of the Pharisees, you will by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. A few things to note here. One, you'll notice Jesus makes it very clear his intentions in his message. He says, I'm not coming to destroy the old law. Rather, I'm coming to fulfill it. I'm coming to make it no longer necessary. And the fulfillment of that law removes the necessity, removes the action, removes the authority of that law. The one who gives the law is going to die. And he is going to usher in a new law. And he's giving them a little bit of a message concerning this thing. But you'll notice what he also says concerning the breaking of these commandments at the second half of verse 19. Whoever does and teaches them shall be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Of course, referencing the counterpart of what he had said, the one who does not do these things, or whoever who breaks these least of these commandments and teaches men so also shall be called least within the kingdom of God. Now, you got to understand something concerning this group of people who he's speaking to. This is primarily a Jewish audience. And so when you're talking about a message concerning the greatest and the least, this is going to be something that kind of opens their ears a little bit, opens their eyes. They're ready to listen. He's saying that the one who breaks these commandments is one who is seen as least within the kingdom. But the one who follows after these commandments is one who is seen great within the kingdom. So there's two sections, if you will, that you could then be divided in. The one who is great or the one who is less, or the least. And so he ushers in this next message. He says, For I say unto you that unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and of the Pharisees, you will by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. Now you got to remember, Jewish audience, who would have been very familiar not with just the Jews, not with just the Jews, the scribes, and the Pharisees, but would have been familiar with their dedication unto the law. The Pharisees were incredibly dedicated, servants and studiers or students of the old law. And so he says, if you and your righteousness do not exceed the righteousness of that of the scribes and the Pharisees, surely you will not enter into the kingdom of heaven. He's pointing something out about this old law here. He's bringing something to light, a problem, or maybe a gap, if you will, that exists within the old law. That is perfection. He says, if you cannot be as righteous as these scribes and Pharisees, then you will by no means enter into the kingdom of heaven. What is he trying to draw to their minds or point out to them? He's saying by your mindset or by your thought, you will not even get into heaven because your righteousness does not exceed that of the scribes and the Pharisees. So notice what he says in verse 21. He begins a series of phrases. So you have heard, but I say unto you phrases. And what he does within these you have heard sections is he addresses the law that they're incredibly familiar with, the old law. The law that they would have been taught and memorized and studied for their entire lives. A law that would have been reminded to them day in and day out. A law that would have been, even in some points, written on their minds or on their arms or put on their chest on some sort of plate. These things would have been evident, would have been present, would have been memorized by all of these who were present. And so Jesus begins to speak about these old laws. He says, you have heard, verse 21, that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder. And whoever murders will be liable or will be in danger of the judgment. But I say unto you that whoever is angry with his brother, notice this, without a cause, shall be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council. But whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger to hellfire. Therefore, if you bring your gift to the altar, and remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Agree with your adversary quickly, while you are on the way with him. Lest your adversary deliver you to the judge hands you over to the officer, and the officer hands you to be thrown into prison. Assuredly, I say unto you that you will by no means get out until you have paid the last penny. Jesus begins this message by talking about murder and ends this message by talking about repaying payment or not settling issues with their adversaries or with their enemies or with those who see contrary unto them. So what in the world is he talking about? You're talking about the old law. You're bringing up a message concerning murder. You're bringing up something that is as plain as can be. In fact, if you look at places like Exodus chapter 20 and verse 13, which is almost comical how small the text shows up here. Very simple. You shall not murder. As simple as that. In fact, you look at other accounts of it. Deuteronomy 5 and verse 17. Once again, you shall not murder. Another account of the recording of the old law. So you look to this message and you go, okay, you have heard, you shall not murder. Simple as that. They know it, they memorize it, they've learned it their entire lives. Then he brings forth a contrast. But I say unto you about murder, or concerning these things. Whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. Whoever says to his brother, Raca, shall be in danger of the council, and whoever says, you fool, shall be in danger of hellfire. He's making mention of something else that talks about the heart. And we've talked a little bit about this even since I've been here, and we even referenced some of these passages before. But I want you to notice something. He is taking this old law, something that was incredibly familiar with them. The same way that we talked about this morning with the parables, how he took some earthly example and then gave it a spiritual meaning so they could grasp it. He's taking the old law, something they would have been incredibly familiar with, and he's expounding it further. You've heard you shall not murder. We can all agree, murder's bad. But I say unto you, don't even be angry with your brother without cause. Don't pronounce Raca, or don't insult, or don't. A good word for it would maybe be to stir up or to entice one to become angry. Don't even begin down this path of hatred or anger or wrath, because it leads to something like murder. But then he shifts this a little bit, and then you'll get to see a little bit why Jesus starts to say these things. Notice what he says in verse 23 of Matthew chapter 5. Therefore, if you bring your gift before the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. You think Jesus is maybe making reference to something that they had been struggling with? They were probably doing a good job of not murdering each other, although they hadn't in times past. They had some struggles with that, strangely enough. But it probably wasn't the issue that they were struggling with murdering one another, but more likely it was the case that they were angry with one another or had issues with one another and were seeking to continue in their worship to God together while still being angry without cause towards one another, while still having disputes in and amongst themselves. So he's saying, okay, in essence, he's saying, okay, it's great that you're not murdering, but you're going before God and trying to offer a gift upon the altar while being an enemy with your own brother. And he then delivers a little more information concerning the adversary, or the one that needs to be reconciled with quickly, so that it doesn't get to the point in which you were put into prison for your actions. He's trying to get them to understand. The old law says things like, you shall not murder. But God's desire is not that you shouldn't just not murder one another, that you should seek for the best of one another. And don't you dare approach the throne of God or the altar of God while not having everything in line with your brother, having a dispute amongst yourselves, and then you try and offer a gift unto the Lord. You know how blasphemous that is? Do you know how empty and vain that type of worship is? The type of worship where you try and offer up a gift before God, even though you yourself are not living a life that is righteous before the Lord. And he's saying it's great that you're not murdering, but you still got some issues that you've got to face. You cannot be angry with your brother without cause. You cannot be angry with your brother without cause and then try and attempt to offer a gift upon the altar to God. And you cannot let these disputes that you have continue until the point where it gets to the point where you are imprisoned until you can repay what you have borrowed or maybe even what you have stolen. The issue that he is trying to get them to see, the thing that he is trying to get them to grasp, is the old law was simple as something like, you shall not murder. But he says, that's not all that God desires. That's not all that he wants. If it was, he would not have delivered this message. Notice what he says concerning adultery as well. Verse 27, he says, you have heard and it was said to those of old, you shall not commit adultery. Where have they heard this? Exodus chapter 20, verse 14. And the deliverance of the old law. You shall not commit adultery. Where else have they heard this? Once again, in the other account of the collection of the old law. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 18, you shall not commit adultery. So when he says, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery, yes, of course, exactly. They have heard that it was said by those of old, you shall not commit adultery. But, verse 28, I say unto you that whoever looks upon a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. I want you to notice that. It doesn't say that he has begun the process of committing adultery with her in his heart. Notice what he says. He has already committed adultery with her in his heart. This use of language that Jesus is going to use, both concerning murder and adultery, and various other things that he will mention and we will go over in just a second. He's talking about these problems that are facing within themselves. Even though the action has not yet taken place, the heart has already committed that action. When you are angry with your brother without cause, you might not have murdered him, but you're not reconciled to him. You ever heard the phrase, you're dead to me? You ever seen that in a movie somewhere, or hopefully not heard it or said it to someone? It's this idea of there's something so despicable that is standing between me and you that it is if you are not alive to me. I want us to be so separated that it is if you do not exist. That's the same kind of language that is being used here concerning adultery as well, and murder. You've got this such a big heart issue that even if you haven't committed adultery physically, or even though you haven't murdered your brother physically, in your heart you have already performed these actions. In your heart you've already done these things. And so he's expounding upon the old law and saying, listen, you've heard these things, you've examined these things, but you're missing the point because you're not fully engulfed within these things within your heart. So notice what he says in verse 29. He says, okay, here's your solution to this. Here's how you solve this problem. If your right eye causes you to sin, you pluck it out and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you that one of your members perish than for your whole body to be cast into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. For it is more profitable for you than for one of the members to perish than for the whole body to be cast into hell. What Jesus is saying, this is so severe. This is so important. This is such a big deal, such an issue, that there is no extent that you can go to separate yourself from this sin so that you do not commit it, even if it's the plucking out of the eye or the cutting off of the hand. Now, I don't encourage you to do that. I think there are other ways that you can separate yourself from sins like that. However, he said there's no extent that you can go to that is too severe to separate you from the sin. It is so bad, so evil, so wicked, so damaging, so hurtful that you do whatever it takes to separate yourself from it. In fact, as we look through the messages that Paul and Peter would write, and some of even which it would have been written to Timothy, you'll make note of sometimes you'll see mentions of different sins that others should avoid, or different things that should be avoided. And the description that is given of fornication, or the description that is given of adultery, is not one of avoid, is not one of look away from, is not one of turn away from, it's run from. Why? Because he understands the power and the danger of this sin. You don't want to commit adultery? You don't want to murder? Well, here's some solutions for you. You don't want to commit adultery? Don't ever look upon someone for lust. Don't look upon them with the intention of lust. You don't want to murder your brother? That's great, wonderful, fantastic. Don't have some sort of thing brewing within inside you so much without cause that you get to the point where it can conceive the idea of murdering them. Don't allow for these things to creep into your hearts, into your minds, and you will not reach that end result. We could also look at passages like verse 31. Furthermore, it has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say unto you that whoever divorces his wife for any reason except sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Now, this specific instance concerning the certificate of divorce can be found in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 1 through 4. which states when a man takes a wife and marries her, and it happens that she finds no favor in his eyes because he has found some uncleanness within her, he writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of his house. Now, when she has departed from his house and goes and becomes another man's wife, if the latter husband detests her and writes her a certificate of divorce, puts it in her hand, and sends her out of her house, or if the latter husband dies who took her as his wife, and then the former husband who divorced her must take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that sin is an abomination before the Lord, and the Lord shall not bring sin to the land which the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. This is a very fun topic, to say the least. I'd encourage you. We had a wonderful lesson on it during the lectureship. We don't have time to dive into this because it would literally take the whole rest of the sermon. I'd encourage you to go listen to that lesson. However, we'll make one mention of this thing here. The mention of the deliverance of the certificate of divorce is a specific command given under the old law. It is a command given that could only be done by the men, never by the woman, and could only be done under certain circumstances. And Jesus is going to make some mention of this while adding to something the same way that he added to the message concerning murder, the same way that he added to the message concerning adultery. He's not going to say that it's just magically okay now for you to do any and everything that you want, but notice what he does say in verse 32. But I say unto you, whoever divorces his wife for any reason except for sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. Notice you'll make mention of other places or other passages like Matthew 19 and verse 9, which I would encourage you to once again to go listen to the lesson that we heard concerning this topic during the lectureship. It addresses these things further and hits the nail on the head concerning these things. However, I would like for us to make mention of one thing, as you notice here. You'll notice that he makes mention of this idea of the one who for any reason except for sexual immorality causes her to commit adultery. Whoever marries a woman who is divorced commits adultery. You'll notice these specific instances here have very specific requirements, and once again, this is something that is further expanded upon within the lectureship sermon, and I'd encourage you to go and listen unto that. Let's look at verse 33. Again, you have heard that it was said to those of old, of Matthew chapter 25, you shall not swear falsely, but you shall perform your oaths before the Lord. But I say unto you, do not swear at all, neither by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is his city of the great king. Nor shall you swear by your head, because you cannot make one hair white or black, but let your yes be yes, your no be no, for whatever is more than these is from the evil one. I want us to notice a few things concerning these oaths. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 7. Once again, this is where this comes from. He makes mention of, you have heard. Well, this is the you have heard. This is the thing they had heard. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name within vain. We can also see in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 12, you shall not swear by my name falsely, nor shall you profane the name of the Lord, for I am the Lord. The name of your God, for I am the Lord. We can also see Numbers chapter 30 and verse 2. If a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by some agreement, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. One thing especially important concerning this is you'll notice that Jesus says to go once again further than what this law says. He says, don't make an oath by my name. That's what you've heard. Don't take an oath by the name of the Lord. Jesus goes further and says, don't even swear by the hairs on your head, because you don't even have control over that. You can't even make your white hairs to be black or your gray hairs to be brown. You cannot change the hairs upon your own head. So what do? How do you avoid these oaths? Well, you live a life that is so pleasing within the sight of God, or that live a life that is so truthful, that is so honest, that verse 37, he says, let your yes be yes, and your no be no. James would further expand upon these things. He says, whatever is more than these is from the evil one. He says, you live a life that is so truthful, so transparent, so honest, that when you tell somebody yes, you don't have to swear by the name of the Lord. You don't have to, as we might do in the South, swear on my mama's grave kind of thing. That your yes can be taken as a yes, and your no can be taken as a no. That no oath is necessary for it. He then gets into verse 38, he gets into a message concerning the second mile. He says, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person, but whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone wants to sue you and take away your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Whoever compels for you to go with him 1 mile, go with him 2. Give to him who asks you, and from him who wants to borrow from you, you do not turn away. Brother Joe read for us a passage concerning this in Exodus chapter 21, verses 23 and following. It says, if any harm follows, then you shall give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe, especially concerning the evil that was being done there in Exodus 21. We can also notice in Deuteronomy chapter 19 and verse 21, your eye shall not pity, life shall be for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot. In the eyes, especially of the old law, this seems as justice. This seems as right. You offend me, I offend you. You slap me, I slap you. You cut off my hand, I cut off yours. An eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. But notice what Jesus says concerning these things. But I say unto you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use and persecute you. You'll notice, got a little ahead of myself. I was like, that doesn't sound right. But if I tell you, verse 39, but I tell you, do not resist the evil person. Whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. If anyone sues you, take him to try and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. If anyone asks for you to go a mile with him, go with him too. Give to him who asks, and from him who wants to borrow, from you do not turn away. He's saying, okay, listen. You have heard of old this idea of justice. This eye for eye, this tooth for tooth, this foot for foot, hand for hand, stripe for stripe, burn for burn. But I say unto you, it's more than just that. It is more than just the returning of what has been given. It's the resisting, not just of a willingness to do wicked or evil back towards him, but rather a submission unto this person in a way that opens up their eyes. Notice what he says, whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him your left. I don't know if you've ever witnessed a fight or been in a fight. I hope you haven't. It's not something that I would encourage anybody to do. I don't like violence. I try to avoid that kind of thing at any and all possibility. But could you imagine that somebody walks up and slaps someone on the face, and instead of getting angry or frustrated, like many or most of us probably would if somebody just randomly walked up and slapped us, but instead offered unto them the other side of the face so that they could slap you on that side as well? Seems preposterous, doesn't it? It seems a little strange, a little weird, a little funny. Or maybe a lawsuit in which somebody is trying to take your car and you give him your boat or your house also. Or maybe someone who is compelling to you to go and do something for you, and instead of just doing the bare minimum, you do twice as much, or above and beyond, as we might say. Or maybe the one who would like to borrow from you, and this word borrow here is almost indicative of a borrow without return. It says instead of turning from him, turn unto him. Be willing to help. Be willing to lend. These things are weird, they're strange, they're abnormal, they're different, they're eye-opening. Why? Well, because of what Jesus said just a few verses, or I guess in a place without chapters or verses, what he said in a few moments before this. You're the light of the world. You're the salt of the earth. You're the example of different. You're the blessed people. The one who are to be exalted above others because of your action and because of your submission. Because of the difference that you make within this world. Because of the changes that you seek after and strive after. So yes, when someone smacks you on the left side of the face, you turn to them to the right. Yes, when someone seeks to gain everything or take everything from you or half of everything from you, you give him the other half. Yes, you do these crazy, radical, weird, strange things like going above and beyond that which is required of you, because that's what Jesus would do. Because that's what it means to be a follower of the law. Instead of seeking retribution as a form of justice, seek to go and be above and beyond as a form of justice. You want what is best for that person truly. You won't retaliate in a way that is evil or wicked. You'll bless them. The one who tries to steal your cloak, you give him your coke, not your coke. The one who tries to steal your cloak, you give him your coat also. The one who slaps you on the left, you turn unto him your right. The one who requests or requires, as would have been required by Roman law for them to take the armor of the soldiers, the one who requires for you to go 1 mile, go with him too. I'm just going to go ahead and be honest with you. We're going to keep going for a little bit. We got a little bit more to talk about. I want us to talk about how radical that bit of message was. How strange, how different, how amazing that message was. You've probably heard it a million times if you've heard it once before. This passage has probably been given the same exact example by every preacher that I've heard, at least for the past 25 years, making mention of the requirement of the Jewish people to carry the Roman soldiers' cloaks and garments or their armor or their weaponry a mile. And so what would these individuals do? They'd go out a mile from their house and they'd put a peg. And they would go up until that point and they would drop exactly what they had been given, exactly what they had been commanded to do, and they would go not a step further. Now you got to remember something. This is the Roman Empire. This isn't just the Roman government. This is the Roman Empire. You know what the Roman Empire doesn't do? They don't just walk in and say, hey, do you mind if we take control? The Roman Empire uses force. They use brutality. They use violence. The Roman Empire takes what they desire and makes it their own. They come into your home. They come into your neighborhood. They come in and amongst your family, and they take whatever they desire. And so the relationship between the Jewish people and the Romans, although there was a bit of submission because of the power of the Empire of Rome, was not one that was very pleasant, especially in the eyes of the Jewish people. In fact, they would do exactly what they were required by Roman law to do, and not a thing more. And Jesus said, that's not enough. That's not enough. It's not enough that you go 1 mile, but it's more so the requirement for you to go 2. Why? You're a Roman soldier. You're walking down the road. You've been walking for many miles, marching to wherever you've been sent by the empire or by the Caesar. You're being commanded like any other soldier to walk. You come upon this Jewish individual who is required by law to take what you have on your back, and they are required by law to carry it 1 mile from their homes. And so what do? On that hot day as you're marching, you turn over your armor, you give them the things that are heavy, they're burdensome, and you let them carry it that mile. Give you a moment of rest. But you notice their peg as it comes up. I'm sure there's probably many others that they could recognize. And as you come upon that peg, you notice that Jewish individual isn't starting to kind of go ahead and move the things from the back into the front, kind of grab it in the hand, ready to set it down, ready to turn around and go back. They keep their head up and they keep marching. And you watch as they pass by that marker that they were required to carry to. And you watch as they continue to keep their eyes ahead. They continue to pass on past this moment of requirement. They continue to press on further than that which was required of you. What's the thought of the Roman soldier in that moment? What's the thought of you as a Roman soldier in that moment? What in the world are they doing? You probably even receive some questions. Hey, wasn't that your exit? Wasn't that your stopping point? Wasn't that your moment that you could not carry this anymore? You see this radicalness that Jesus is trying to introduce? You see this change, this different of mindset, this weird, unique, strange, out-of-this-world concept that He is introducing into them? He's saying, listen, you want to make a difference, you've got to be different kind of people. You don't seek to harm someone as a way of getting even or seeking after justice. Rather, you go above and beyond as a way of making a difference. You go the extra mile. You turn the other cheek. You give that which is not required for you to give. Why? Because people are going to notice that. People are going to see that. Let's keep going. Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 and following. He says, you have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I say unto you, Love your enemies, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, and pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven, for He makes His Father in heaven. For He makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? Therefore, you shall be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Of course, you can look at those you have heard in Leviticus chapter 19 and verse 18 about vengeance. You could also look at Psalm 41 and verse 10. O Lord, be merciful to me, raise me up that I may repay. As well as you could look at Deuteronomy chapter 23, the things concerning the Ammonites and the Moabites, as well as the Israelites and their treatment of these enemies. This message concerning this retribution, or this message concerning a love for your neighbor and a hate for your enemy, was so prevalent within their mindset, and he's saying it's got to be different. It's got to change. This has been your old practice. This might have been okay under the old law, but things are different. Things are not the same any longer. Notice what he says in verse 44. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. Notice this. Pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. What are you saying, Jesus? You want me to pray for the people who hate me? You want me to love my enemy as I love my neighbor? You want me to bless those who seek to curse and persecute me and hate me? And you want me to do what? Remember, Jewish audience, Roman Empire, not a great relationship. They're witnessing these things. They're seeing the evil that is being done, and Jesus is saying, pray for them. Pray for them. Why? Verse 45. So that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. For He makes the sun to rise both on the evil and on the good. He sends the rain on not just the just, but also upon the unjust. If you love those who love you, what does that benefit you? Don't the tax collectors, which would have been a backhanded insult in a way, don't the tax collectors do the same thing? Great. You love those who love you? Fantastic. That's the easiest thing that you can do, to love someone who loves you. Verse 47. And if you greet your brethren only, what do you do more than others? Do not even the tax collectors do so? You want to be a servant of Jesus? You want to be a follower of God? You want to follow after this new law? You want to see the power of it? You want to see a difference in this world? You want to see a change? You want to make some sort of momentous action that changes the lives of those who are around you? Don't just love those who love you. Love those who hate you, who seek to destroy you, who would rather see you suffer and die and be persecuted, maybe even at their own hands. That is their desire. But you pray for them. You love them. And you bless them in any way that you know how. Why? Verse 48. Therefore you shall be perfect just as your Father in heaven is perfect. Jesus is trying to open their eyes. Listen, the old law, it's beautiful. It's got some wonderful messages. Don't kill. Don't steal. Don't commit adultery. Don't bear false witness. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. These things they're great. They're wonderful. But you've got to do more. You've got to do something that is different. Can you imagine the radical change that it would exist in this world if instead of hating those who hate us, we love those who hate us? Could you imagine the radical difference that could be made in this world if instead of seeking after retribution or seeking after a form of justice that brings forth pain and suffering, we go the extra mile and turn the other cheek? Could you imagine if we lived in a world that instead of allowing for for things like murder or adultery to be committed, that we so remove these things from our hearts, so separate ourselves from our hearts that we don't even get angry without cause one toward another. You look back to the teachings that Jesus had in the Beatitudes. Blessed, blessed, blessed. All these people are blessed. Why? Because they are different from the rest of this world. And He challenges them, you yourselves need to be different. You need to be special. You need to be unique. You need to be what others would call weird. Instead of slapping the person when they slap you, you turn the other cheek. That's weird. That's not normal. That's not what is required or seen within the world. That's different. Why? So that you can show others the power of this God that you serve. When others persecute you and spitefully use you and seek to destroy you and persecute you and kill you because of their hatred for you, you love them. You bless them. You pray for them. Why? Because that is exactly what God desires. Because that is the kind of perfection that God is requesting that we strive after. So what does this mean to us? I know this is probably one of my longest sermons I've ever preached, much less the longest one I've preached here, but I'm glad that you've been patient with me. What does this mean? What does this radical message to us mean? If you're not going out into this world and being so different from the world, what good are we even doing? What are we even striving for? If we're just as angry as everyone else, if we are just as lustful as everyone else, if we are just as seeking after restitution in the form of aggression as everyone else, if we are just as hateful or spiteful or resentful as everyone else, what good are we doing? We're supposed to be different. We're supposed to be unique. We're His royal priesthood, the called out, those who are set apart for a purpose of service unto the Lord, and you're looking just like everybody else. Jesus is trying to get them to understand you cannot just be one of the crowd. You cannot be just a member of this world. You have to be a citizen of the kingdom of God first and foremost. You've got to be so much different from everybody else. All for the purpose, as He mentioned, concerning the light and the salt. All for the purpose of bringing glory and edification unto the Father, so that others can serve Him, so that others can seek to be servants of His. That's what we're doing here. That's our purpose. That's our mission. To be servants of His who produce more servants. To be disciples of His who produce more disciples. And if we're not living the life that is fitting for that, if we're not living a life that is glorifying of that mindset, then we're doing something wrong. And we got to do something different. We got to be weird sometimes. We got to turn the other cheek. Pray for those who spitefully use us. Settle disputes, no matter how simple or strange as they may be. We got to look not into the things of this world, but rather look into the Father. Because we've got a purpose here. We've got something to accomplish. And we can't do it if we're distracted by the things of this world. If you're here tonight and your life is one that is not pleasing within the sight of God, don't leave here without making it right. We looked at the disputes concerning between brothers. An issue that you have between your brother, and then you try and go before the Lord to make an offering unto Him. You know what's just as bad as that? Having a dispute amongst God or with God. Having something that is separating between you and Him. And trying and going and offering a gift unto Him. Get your life right with God. Make that change within your life. Do something that helps you to be together with Him so that your worship can be lifted up as something that is edifying and glorifying and worthy in His sight. Maybe it's the case tonight that you need to be added to the Lord's church through baptism or repent of your sins. If there's any way that we can change your life, help you to be better, help you to be stronger, help you to be more different from this world as God has called us out to be, please come while we stand and while we sing.